History of the Ottoman Empire. The astonishing rapidity with which a people whose origin is veiled in obscurity started upon the scene of history, and, by the extent of their conquests, caused such decided and permanent changes in Europe, places the Turks before us as a remarkable nation, nor have their conquests been science, under the name of Ottomans. They have subdued to their dominion the fairest and most fertile portions of Asia and Europe, and they retain, in the midst of civilization, the primitive habits and manners brought with them from the mountains of Turkestan. While other nations in Europe have been gradually advancing in science, literature, and the arts, this people, until very lately, have despised every improvement that did not administer to their arrogance and sensuality. Although the Ottoman Empire has continued to recede for upwards of 150 years, during that period they have maintained many long and bloody wars with their powerful neighbors, the Russians and Austrians, and the independent Ottoman external disasters and the influence of long-continued internal oppression. They have often risen from the shock which seemed fatal to their cause, and they continue to hold their independence with vigor and tenacity. But even after this long period of decay, the world hardly affords a nobler empire than that which is swayed by the descendants of Othman, bounded by the Euphrates on the east, the Mediterranean or the Libyan deserts on the south, the Adriatic on the west, and the Ukraine on the north. It numbers amongst its inland streams the Nile, the Danube, and the Euphrates, and includes the cities of Egypt, of Nineveh, of Babylon, and Constantinople. It enjoys every advantage which the bounty of nature can accumulate: the vine, the olive, the orange, and citron adorn its slopes, the oak and the pine flourish on its mountains, wheat, maize and rice wave on its plains, supplying almost doubly without the aid of the husband man everything that administers to the wants, the comforts, or the luxury of man, but blasted by the despotism of the East and the rigidity of Mahometan rule. All these blessings have not been able to stop the progress of internal as well as external decay. An empire so extensive and embracing provinces so remote necessarily includes many different races and sects of people everywhere. Half, in some places 2/3, of the population of the empire are Christians, and nations and sects of all imaginable varieties compose the inferior classes of the Ottoman Empire. The merchants are nearly all Greeks or Armenians. The sailors islanders from the archipelago. The money lenders Jews, and the cultivators of the soil, generally descendants of the inhabitants of the old Greek Empire, yet 3 millions of Turks in Europe, and perhaps 4 millions in Asia retain all this heterogeneous population in subjection, and compel them to labor and pay taxes for the support of their government. The only parallel to this which the world exhibits is the SWR maintained by a much smaller number of British over the immense population of the Indian Peninsula. Although the Ottoman Empire is still vast and extensive, It no longer attracts the fear of its neighbors, neither the wisdom of its counsels nor the valor of its forces are respected or feared in Europe, but the splendor of its former exploits and the celebrity of its ancient character arrest the attention of mankind. It is true that the wars of the Turks were disgraced by perfidy and stained by violence, but they exhibited such energy in pursuit and brilliancy in success that their claim to national preeminence for centuries stood undisputed. While the social condition of the Turks, supported by every prejudice that can influence their manners and confirmed by the inveterate habits of ages, may excite the pity or contempt of the Christian states, the maxims of their policy and the injustice of their government, sanctioned alike by religion and law, have often incurred the indignation of Europe, the rapid progress of civilization, which, during the last 4 centuries, has so completely altered the civil and political institutions of the Western states, has made little perceptible progress in Turkey, and every discovery, whether in arts or science, which has contributed to the happiness and the power of man, has been obstinately resisted by the followers of Mahomet. National prejudices strongly influence mankind. The patriotic mind may cling to the institutions of its country and resist every encroachment tending to shake a fabric that has become venerable by the lapse of ages, but experience dissipates prejudices and measures suggested by experience, calculated to ameliorate the condition of the people and to facilitate the progress of national improvement, will be readily adopted by every enlightened government. The policy of the Turks ever has been to resist innovation, incapable of overcoming their national prejudices and of breaking the fetters which an uncompromising and sanguinary religion imposed upon them. They have remained a monument of social and political degradation. For 3 centuries after their settlement in Europe, the martial discipline and religious enthusiasm of the Turks, and the energy of their character, rendered them not only powerful but dangerous to the independence of Europe. At the period of the Ottoman invasion, the Christian states were sunk to the lowest point of ignorance and political disorder, and were incapable of resisting the Turkish arms. 3 centuries of conquest completed the period of Ottoman greatness. Since then it has suffered a gradual decay. Such is the influence of religion, science and learning on national fortunes, that those conquerors who nearly accomplished the overthrow of Christendom are now protected and maintained in Europe by the arms of the Christian powers. Many circumstances contributed to put an end to the ascendancy of the Turkish Empire after the taking of Constantinople by the Turks in 1543 AD. The Greeks took shelter in Italy and imported a tincture of their science and of their refined taste in poetry and eloquence, and the esteem for literature gradually propagated itself throughout every nation in Europe. The art of printing invented about this time extremely facilitated the progress of all these improvements. The invention of gunpowder changed the art of war. Many innovations were soon made in religion, which greatly affected those that embraced them, and thus a general revolution was made in human affairs throughout this part of the world, and nations gradually attain that situation with regard to commerce, arts, science, police and cultivation in which they have ever since progressed. The Turks, on the other hand, obstinately adhered to the barbarous maxims of their civil and religious institutions, and the arrogance of their character led them to resist all those improvements which so rapidly encouraged the civilization and increased the power of Europe. The laws of war&d, maxims of policy brought with them from and the Scythian deserts, or drawn from the Quran, began to render them odious to the civilized states, and they have an ot without reason been condemned for the illiberality, injustice, and feebleness of their government, the rudeness of their institutions, and the degradation to which they have fallen as a nation. In the wars of the Turks they followed the policy of their Scythian forefathers, and in the triumph of their arms, it does an ot appear that they abused the rights of conquest beyond their traditional maxims, and the precepts of their religion and laws, nor were the states of Europe more humane in the hour of victory, but while the laws of war, by which the Christian powers are now regulated, partake of the progressive civilization of the age, the cruel maxims of the Scythian conquerors, and the sanguinary precepts of the Prophet, have maintained, until lately, their ascendancy over the Turkish mind, in order that we may form some idea of the character of their warfare. It is necessary to glance at the policy pursued by some of the most remarkable of the Scythian conquerors. The Scythians were uniformly actuated by a savage and destructive spirit, of war, that restrained the exercise of national rapine and murder, are founded upon principles of national interest, but considerations of justice, of hope and of fear are almost unknown in the pastoral state of nations. The idea of permanent benefit by a moderate use of conquest, the fear that the desolation they inflict may be retaliated upon themselves, are considerations too delicate for the savage state. After the Mughals had subdued the northern provinces of China, it was seriously proposed, not in the hour of victory and passion, but in a calm deliberate council, to exterminate all the inhabitants of that populous country, that the vacant land might be converted to the pasture of cattle, in the cities of Asia which yielded to the Mughals the inhuman abuse of the rights of war exercised with a regular form of discipline. The inhabitants of the conquered cities were assembled in a plain in the neighborhood, and formed into 3 divisions, and were massacred on the spot by the troops. Who had formed a circle round the captive multitudes. Many of the women were sold into slavery, and subjected to the most brutal violence, a few of the youth selected from the multitude were dragged into the armies of the conquerors. Such was the behavior of the Moguls when they were not conscious of any extraordinary rigor. The most casual provocation often involved the whole people in an indiscriminate massacre. Flourishing cities and towns were leveled with unrelenting perseverance. The three great cities of Khorasan, Maru, Nizaba, Herat were destroyed by the arms of Zingis, and the number of the slain, of which an exact account was taken, amounted to 4,347,000 persons. Tamerlane was educated at a later period, and in the profession of the Mahometan religion, yet his brutal ravages exceeded those of Attila or Zingis, and, says Gibbon, both the Tartar and the Hun are justly entitled to the epithet of the scourge of God. Although neither national nor individual barbarity can admit of any excuse, yet if we consider the revolutions and wars of modern states, which are justly entitled to the terms civilized and polite, and consider the inhuman massacres and wasting desolations which have accompanied them, well, look upon the ravages of the Turks with greater forbearance, and when it is recollected that the maxims of their religion and the example of Prophet himself directed them to conquest and to the subjugation and conversion of the infidels, their wars, to them at least, had a divine sanction. The lust of conquest, when associated with religious fanaticism, has been the greatest scourge of the human race. It must, however, be acknowledged that civilization has sometimes accompanied the standard of the conqueror. Wars that have been undertaken in the name of religion have served only to desolate the earth with blood, and their infamy alone, as a lesson to mankind, renders them worthy of record. The history of the world can exhibit no such examples of cruelty and wickedness as those committed under the influence of fanaticism, and the warrior who unfurls his banner in the cause of heaven readily finds an excuse for every enormity that a savage heroism can suggest. The sieges of Antioch, Jerusalem, and Acre by the Crusaders are proofs of this remark. Many instances perhaps of a less striking kind, but not less cruel and barbarous, might be enumerated to show the ferocity engendered by religious warfare. The wars of the Turks, it must be remarked, were for the most part aggressive, and therefore of the most unjustifiable kind, but they do not exhibit more instances of wanton cruelty than the wars of other nations at the same period, if we be desirous of forming a correct judgment of the Turkish character as exhibited through a long period of conquest. We must judge of them by comparison, and not by any standard of abstract virtue. The Turks have long ceased to be aggressors, their more recent wars having been in self-defense or to crush their rebellious subjects, that which is now being waged against them has no parallel in the history of their aggressions,